Hello, this is Mr. Seeley. I'm just filling you in, for those of you in Tanzania, some of the stuff you've missed and you need to know about. Following this, there's going to be some little snippets from the class that they produced while you're away. I hope you enjoy that. Firstly, I just want to talk to you a little bit about war communism. That is something that you need to understand about. It's introduced by Lenin after the Bolsheviks took control in 1917. There's several key things that you need to know about it. The Bolsheviks took control of factories, mines, workshops and railways. So they took complete control. The government took control of all these industries and centralised the economy. Another thing they did, which was pretty harsh on the peasants, was they started seizing all their grain at fixed prices. Often the grain was taken from peasants by force. Now this was important because they needed to feed the Red Army. Remember, there's a civil war going on after they'd taken control, so getting food supplies for the Red Army was crucial. But this is a key factor of war communism. So grain taken control by force. Another thing they did is nationalised all industries. So they nationalised industries. That means the state, the government, takes control of all industry and then runs the whole system from the centre. So the Bolshevik Party nationalised and ran all industry. They also took control of banks so that they could take control of money, which was then banned. So they got rid of money to try and set up this perfect communist state. Food was also rationed in order to deal with food shortages, and private enterprise was banned. So you weren't allowed to have a private company and make money for yourself. So that's quite important. Now they did this all during the time of the Civil War. So there is a small debate about whether they did this in order simply to win the Civil War, or whether they were actually trying to introduce hardcore communist policies. But you really need to just read up on war communism and understand about that. I'm going to hand over to James, who's got a little bit of story time on war communism. Boom.
Hello children, and welcome to Story Time on CBeebies. Today we're going to be learning about war communism. War communism was an economic policy instituted by the Bolsheviks for a variety of reasons. Firstly, they wanted to end capitalism. This meant abolishing money, the free market and social classes, although a distinction between peasants and workers remained. It was also an attempt to win the Civil War. This meant rationing food to combat food shortages, and also people were conscripted into industry to aid the war effort. It was also an attempt to install communist ideals on Russia. This is shown by their introduction of free transport, the nationalization of industry, the redistribution of housing, and the abolition of money. Finally, it was an attempt to control the economy. This can be seen through the nationalization of industry, the banning of private markets and trading, and the introduction of labor conscription. Thank you for watching. Next week, we'll be looking at genocide through the ages.
Thank you, James. That was most informative. I'm sure all the children will have learnt a lot from that. Now, what we need to move on to is looking at whether war communism was a success or not. Well, it wasn't. It was an economic disaster for the country and deeply unpopular. And its unpopularity led to a revolt, a mutiny by the sailors at Kronstadt, which was the naval base near Petrograd. They rose up against Bolshevik rule. They didn't feel the Bolsheviks were delivering what they promised, and so they led a mutiny. This was brutally crushed by the Red Army, led by Trotsky. They marched across the ice, dressed up in white camouflage costumes, uniforms, attacked the naval base, brutally crushed the rebellion. But Lenin realised that he needed to change, and he set up something called the New Economic Policy. I'm going to hand over to Archie, who's got a little bit to say about this. Check it out.
Things weren't great with war communism. This was highlighted in the Kronstadt Mutiny. So Lenin introduced a new economic policy called the New Economic Policy. The NEP allowed for private industry, peasants to keep some surplus food and other aspects of capitalism. Most importantly, though, it saw the introduction of net men. These were people who were allowed to set up small businesses and trade. Lots of these net men who had become quite rich were kulaks, which were annoying some of the middle class. There were some different effects of the NEP. Some positive ones were food production increased, industrial production increased, and private trade increased. These are the positive impacts, but negative ones aren't that important.
Archie, very informative. Now we're just going to hand over to James, who's going to talk to us a little about the reasons why war communism failed. Let's go.
Communism was abandoned because Russia was facing economic, social and political collapse. Peasants were destroying their crops rather than it being seized by communists. There was famine leading to cannibalism. Living conditions grew worse, leading to strikes and protests, resulting in increased food rations to try and calm them down. And there was civil unrest about unequal say in debates. It was clear something had to change, and the solution was NEP, the New Economic Policy.
Are we learning a lot? I think we are. Right. Need to focus on something now called the New Economic Policy, the NEP. This was brought in by Lenin, and there were many changes. It was a move away from war communism, which had been very unpopular. Several things were introduced. For example, peasants were allowed to sell their grain for profit, which was interesting, so a big change there. And this led to a class of peasants called kulaks. More about them later, but kulaks, it means tight-fisted. That's where it actually comes from. So kulak is Russian for tight-fisted. And this richer class of peasants started to develop. Private industry was also allowed. People started setting up businesses. And there was kind of a rush for private enterprise. And this was actually very successful for the economy. And it led to a group of people that became known as NEP men or NEP women. People who set up private businesses and started making a lot of money from it. Now, these were unpopular with the Bolsheviks, but generally, the new economic policy was a success. The economy picked up. People were much happier. Thing is, to the Bolsheviks, though, this was selling out. This was not true communism. So many of them were against it. Now, that's all from me. I'm going to hand over to Jago, who's just going to rap about it. Very entertaining, seeing him trying to get proletariat dictatorship into a rap and make it rhyme is quite entertaining. But let's hand over. Let's go. Check it out. Okay, mic check. 1, 2.
Yeah. It's the net man. Russia under Lenin, a dictator. Everybody knows he's just as bad as the Tsar. Wagwan all my peasants in the USSR. Had a bit of money but they took it away. Made me wish it was the US&A. Give it up for NEP, yeah you know me. Give it up for NEP, yeah you know me. I wanted to vote for the SRs but took my freedom of speech, which was harsh. Lenin always wanted a proletariat dictatorship. He looks at Russia and thinks he owns it. Yo, Netman out, cuz. Yeah, that was quite violent.